My name is Claire, and 15 years ago, I helped my best friend's family win a house by making it smell like a sewer, a dead cat, and a biker gang's after party, all on the same afternoon. That's not a metaphor. I mean that literally. Rotten eggs. Ammonia. A moldy couch on the neighbor's lawn. And 30 of the largest rugby players you've ever seen, revving motorcycles outside a stranger's open house. By the end of the day, we hadn't just ruined a sale. We'd saved a family of 7 from losing everything they'd worked for. If you've ever watched someone in power squeeze the people who trusted them, and dreamed about the day they'd get exactly what was coming to them, this story is for you. Stick with me, because the ending is one of the most satisfying paybacks I've ever been part of. And if stories like this get your blood pumping, stick around till the end, because we've got a lot more where this came from. Let me back up and tell you how it all started. My best friend, I'll call her Emma, met her husband Daniel young. By their late 20s they had 5 kids together. 5 children under one roof, in a city where rent alone could swallow a paycheck whole before you even thought about food or bills. It wasn't an easy life, but it was a full one, loud and chaotic in the best way, the kind of house that always smelled like someone was baking something and always had at least one kid crying about a missing shoe. They found a house that fit them, eventually. Old. 4 bedrooms. A kitchen that looked like it hadn't been touched since the previous decade. Drains that groaned like they were haunted every time someone ran the dishwasher. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of place you'd see on the cover of a magazine. But it was theirs to rent, and it was big enough for 5 kids to have somewhere to sleep that wasn't a hallway, and that mattered more to Emma and Daniel than granite countertops ever could. The landlord was a woman I'll call Margaret. Elderly, wealthy. The kind of wealthy where the rent she collected from that house was pocket change compared to the rest of her portfolio. But Margaret liked Emma. She liked watching those 5 kids grow up in her old house, liked hearing about school plays and scraped knees and birthday parties held in a backyard that badly needed new fencing. She'd apparently done this before, quietly helping tenants she trusted work toward owning the roof over their heads, treating it less like a business transaction and more like passing something forward. So she made Emma and Daniel a promise. Freeze the rent. Save every dollar you can. When you're ready, I'll sell you this house at a fair price. 5 years. That's how long it took them. 5 years of scraping, sacrificing, saying no to things other families said yes to without a second thought. Vacations, new cars, nights out, new clothes for growing kids that could just as easily be handed down instead. Every spare cent went toward a down payment on a house with bad drains and ugly wallpaper and a family they loved living inside it. They didn't complain. They didn't even really talk about how hard it was, not out loud, not to anyone but each other in those quiet moments after the kids were finally asleep. Finally, they were ready. They sat down with Margaret and told her, "We've got the money now. We're ready to buy." Margaret smiled. Told them she was proud of them, that she always knew they'd get there. 2 days later, she died. Here's where the story turns dark. Margaret had 4 adult children. I'll call them the Whitfield siblings. Each one independently wealthy in their own right. Each one inheriting a stack of properties that, frankly, they didn't need and would barely notice sitting in a portfolio somewhere, generating rent they'd never even have to think about. When they first spoke to Emma and Daniel, they were reassuring. Of course the sale would still go through, they said. Mom's word was good. They just needed to wait for probate to clear, that's all. Just paperwork and patience. Nothing was changing. Take your time. Emma and Daniel believed them. Why wouldn't they? They'd earned this house through 5 years of quiet sacrifice, and these were Margaret's own children, surely carrying forward a promise their mother had made in good faith. So while probate crawled along through the courts, Emma and Daniel started fixing the place up like it was already theirs. Stripping the ugly wallpaper in the hallway. Repainting the kids' bedrooms in colors they'd chosen together as a family. Planning where the new couch would go, where they'd finally put in a proper garden. Then probate settled. And the Whitfield siblings' story changed completely. Suddenly, the price Margaret had promised, the price Emma and Daniel had spent 5 years saving toward, dollar by careful dollar, wasn't the price anymore. The siblings tacked on $80,000. No warning call. No conversation. No negotiation. Just a number, dropped on the table like it cost them nothing at all to say it out loud. Because it was nothing to them. $80,000, split 4 ways, $20,000 each, to people who already had more money sitting in various accounts than they'd realistically spend in 3 lifetimes. Emma and Daniel applied for a bigger loan anyway, because what else could they do? Desperate, scrambling, running the numbers again and again late at night, hoping some version of the math would work out in their favor. The bank said no. And then came the part that really turned my stomach when Emma told me over the phone, her voice cracking in a way I'd never heard from her before. The Whitfields weren't just raising the price on Emma and Daniel. They were putting the house on the open market entirely. An open house was scheduled for exactly 1 week out. In a red-hot rental and housing market, with prices climbing every month and buyers circling any decent property like sharks smelling blood in the water, everyone involved knew exactly what that meant. Someone else, some stranger with the right amount of cash sitting in the bank, was going to walk through that front door, fall in love with the bones of the house, write a check on the spot, and Emma's family. 5 kids, 1 very confused dog, and a decade of birthday parties and school photos. And memories pinned to that refrigerator, would be handed a move-out date like it was nothing. I remember that phone call more clearly than I remember most of that entire year. Emma's voice breaking as she laid it all out for me, piece by piece. The frozen rent, which had felt like such a gift for 5 years, had quietly become a trap, because it meant there was nothing remotely comparable left for them to rent instead. 5 bedrooms, in that city, at whatever the new market rate had climbed to. It simply didn't exist. Or if it did exist somewhere, they couldn't come close to affording it, not with 5 kids and Daniel's income and everything else stacked against them. This wasn't just about losing a house anymore. This was about a family being quietly erased from a neighborhood they'd built a life in, because 4 people who already had everything decided they wanted a little bit more. And a little bit more, when you're that wealthy, apparently never feels like enough. I sat with that phone call long after I hung up the receiver. And somewhere in the space between anger and helplessness, something in me went very, very calm and very, very focused. The Whitfields hadn't technically done anything illegal. They were, as far as the law was concerned, entirely allowed to do this. But legal and decent have never been the same word, not once in the history of either concept, and I decided that night, sitting alone in my kitchen with a cup of tea gone cold in front of me, that if the law wasn't going to stop them, I would find another way to even the scales myself. I wasn't about to let 5 kids lose their home so that 4 grown adults, none of whom needed the money, could split an extra $20,000 each that they genuinely never even noticed was missing from their accounts. So I started researching. Not revenge, not at first, real estate. What actually makes a house sell quickly? What makes a house sit stagnant on the market, untouched, ignored by everyone who walks through the front door? What makes a buyer take 1 step inside, wrinkle their nose without even realizing they're doing it, and quietly walk right back out to their car? There's an entire industry, it turns out, built around staging a home to sell, decluttering it, brightening it, making it feel spacious and welcoming and full of possibility. I decided we were going to build the exact opposite of that industry, from scratch, in 7 days. And the beautiful part, the part that made this feel less like sabotage and more like justice, was that none of it would make Emma and Daniel look like bad tenants to anyone who came asking questions later. It just had to make the house itself feel, and smell, like a terrible mistake. Here's exactly what we did. We started with space. We pulled every single piece of furniture away from the walls and crowded the rooms deliberately, borrowing extra chairs and extra shelves and extra clutter from friends and family, anything we could get our hands on in time. Then we hung motorcycle memorabilia across every inch of the living room wall, floor to ceiling, wall to wall. The house that had always felt cozy and lived in to Emma's family suddenly felt cramped and chaotic and, frankly, a little unhinged to anyone walking in cold. Buyers step through a front door and their brain does the math in about 4 seconds flat, and that math was screaming one word at everyone who visited: small. Then came the smell, and this is where things got genuinely creative. Emma boiled a full head of cabbage on the stove that morning, letting that thick, heavy, sulfurous smell soak deep into the curtains and the carpet fibers until it felt like it had always lived there. We sprayed ammonia liberally around both the front and back doors, the exact scent of a dozen stray cats marking territory night after night after night. And then, the true masterstroke of the entire operation. 24 rotten eggs, poured slowly and deliberately straight down the kitchen drain. Anyone who has ever smelled real sewer gas knows there is no other scent quite like it on Earth. And within about an hour, that entire house smelled like it was actively rotting from somewhere deep inside its own walls. Next, we worked on the neighborhood itself, starting with the house directly across the street. We found a filthy, mildew-stained old couch somewhere and, with full permission from the very willing neighbor, dumped it right in the middle of their front lawn where it couldn't possibly be missed. Nothing quietly tells a potential buyer this street is going downhill quite like a ruined couch slowly rotting in someone's front yard for the world to see. Then we called in every favor we had. Anyone we knew with a loud, rattling, exhaust-blowing car was asked to do slow, deliberate laps past the house throughout the entire open house. All morning long. The quiet, sleepy residential street suddenly sounded like rush-hour traffic on a freeway on-ramp, engines revving past every few minutes without fail. And then, my favorite part of the entire plan, we called in the rugby club. Picture this scene for a second. A full-contact rugby team, the kind of men built like refrigerators with necks wider than most people's waists, showing up on motorcycles in their roughest, most intimidating gear. The neighbor right next door to the house, fully in on the plan, absolutely delighted to help, set up a full barbecue right there in their own front yard. Free food. Cheap beer. A genuine, loud, smoky party, timed perfectly to peak at exactly the moment potential buyers were supposed to be quietly touring the house next door in polite silence. Open house day finally arrived, and it was glorious, beautiful chaos from the very first minute. Cars rattled and roared past on a loop, engine after engine after engine. The smell hit every single buyer the moment they opened that front door, and you could genuinely watch their expressions change in real time, that unmistakable flicker of disgust crossing their face before they'd even said a single word. Most people walked through the entire house in under 2 minutes flat and left again without saying anything to anyone. One woman sat parked in her car across the street for a long, long while, just quietly watching the party unfold next door. The motorcycles, the thick barbecue smoke curling into the sky, the noise echoing down the block, before eventually starting her engine again and driving away without ever setting foot inside. Only one man actually stayed long enough to talk to anyone. Brave, or maybe just stubborn, or maybe he genuinely liked the house underneath all that chaos. He struck up a conversation with someone leaving the party next door on his way back to his car and asked, almost casually, if this was some kind of regular thing around here. "Oh, absolutely," the guy said, playing his part beautifully without missing a beat. "Every couple of weeks, like clockwork. This is actually just the after party, if you can believe it. The real party was 3 doors down last night. This is just the cleanup crew winding down." Then, almost as a passing afterthought, he mentioned the drains. How they were always backing up, always causing trouble. How the whole street tended to smell like this on certain days, depending on the wind. The man left shortly after. No offer was made. By the very end of that long day, Emma and Daniel were the only people who had made a bid on the house. They still had to stretch further than they'd originally planned, paying more than felt entirely fair given everything they'd already sacrificed, but nowhere close to the extra $80,000 the Whitfields had been chasing in the first place. They signed the papers that same evening, paid the deposit before the sun went down, made the entire thing official and locked in. Which mattered enormously, because of exactly what happened next. Just a few days later, that same brave man from the open house came back, his nose apparently fully recovered by then, and put in a formal offer $30,000 higher than what Emma and Daniel had ultimately paid for the house. Too late. Strict anti-gazumping laws in that region meant that once a deposit had been paid and the papers signed, the sale was completely locked in, no matter what came along afterward. There was absolutely nothing the Whitfield siblings could do about it, no matter how much they might have wanted to. I would have paid real money just to see the look on their faces when they got that phone call. People sometimes hear this story years later and think it's really about the smell, or the bikers, or the 24 rotten eggs. It isn't, not really. It's about what happens when people who already have everything decide they still deserve a little bit more. entirely at the expense of people who have almost nothing left to lose. Emma and Daniel didn't get lucky that week. They got even, with a little help from their friends. And I got to sit back and watch four extremely wealthy adults learn, the hard way, that greed doesn't always win in the end. Sometimes it just gets quietly and thoroughly outsmarted by a boiled cabbage, some ammonia, and 30 men on motorcycles who are more than happy to help.